December the 15th, 1989, all 4 engines suddenly failed on a KLM Airlines Boeing 747 high above the remote Alaskan wilderness. Smoke filled the cockpit and the pilots tried desperately to restart the engines.
We don't know. We have to go out. It's smoky in the cockpit at the moment, sir.
As their aircraft began losing altitude at a terrifying rate.
867, we have 6 and we are descending now.
The lives of all 245 people on board depended on whether they could restart their engines before they hit the mountains below. This is the story of KLM Flight 867. KLM Flight 867 departed Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport at just after 8:30 in the morning on December the 15th, 1989. Its destination was Narita Airport in Tokyo, Japan, with a stopover for refueling in Anchorage, Alaska. The aircraft for this journey was a brand new Boeing 747-400, released that same year, featuring cutting-edge technology. It was equipped with advanced computerized systems, a modern glass cockpit with digital screens replacing older analog dials, and required only 2 pilots, instead of the 3 previously needed. This modern cockpit greatly reduced pilot workload, allowing for more efficient flight operations and enhanced safety. The 747-400 was one of the most advanced commercial airliners at the time, capable of flying farther and more efficiently than its predecessors. But in just a few hours, this state-of-the-art aircraft would be pushed to the edge of its design and beyond. In command of this flight was Captain Carl van der Eist, age 51, who had over 13,000 hours of flight experience. However, the new 747-400 was so advanced that he only had about 100 flight hours on this particular model. Joining him were 2 first officers, Im Fischer, 27, and Walter Vierboom, also in his 20s. Both were highly trained, but still relatively new to the 747-400. Vierboom reportedly had over 7,600 total flight hours, indicating a high level of experience. As the crew navigated northward over the English Channel, everything appeared routine. The aircraft was cruising steadily at high altitude for the long transpolar leg of the journey. Passengers settled into their routines, reading, watching movies, sleeping. The crew monitored systems, coordinated with traffic control, and prepared for their stop in Anchorage. But what the crew didn't know yet was that in just minutes, their flight would encounter an invisible threat at 25,000 feet, and the decisions they made next would determine whether disaster could be avoided. Thousands of miles away, deep in the Earth's crust, trouble had been brewing. The day before, Mount Redoubt volcano in southern Alaska had erupted, spewing plumes of ash and smoke high into the atmosphere. The eruption reached nearly 40,000 feet, well into the altitude of cruising jetliners. The ash cloud, driven by strong upper-level winds, spread across hundreds of miles of airspace. Although it had stopped erupting earlier that day, the situation remained volatile. The crew had been notified of the eruption and of the possibility that the volcano may erupt again as they neared Anchorage. But no one had current data on the ash cloud's location, and volcanic ash, invisible on weather radar, is extremely difficult to detect, especially at night or in overcast conditions. Ash clouds don't contain moisture, so the radar sees nothing. To the aircraft systems, it's just empty sky. The dangers of volcanic ash were known to the pilots. In 1982, a British Airways 747 encountered an ash cloud at night over Indonesia. It lost power on all 4 engines and descended rapidly before the crew managed to restart them. The passengers had no idea what was happening, and many began writing final messages to loved ones. That flight survived, but barely. It served as a grim reminder of just how serious ash encounters could be. The next part is vital to understanding the events that will unfold. If you understand what ash does to an aircraft, you'll understand how it pushed one of the safest planes in the world into a total systems failure. 11 hours after leaving Amsterdam, Flight 867 began its descent into Anchorage. At this point, the aircraft was over Alaska, and Redoubt volcano was roughly 150 miles away. There were clouds ahead, but the crew couldn't tell if they were ordinary or dangerous. As they passed through 26,000 feet, the first officer made contact with Anchorage Air Traffic Control.
KLM 867 Heavy is reaching level 250 heading 1.
Okay, do you have this sign on the ash plume at this time?
Yeah, it's just cloudy. It could be ashes. It's a little browner than the normal cloud, but
The aircraft then entered the cloud. Suddenly, acrid smoke began to fill the cockpit. The pilots quickly realized they'd flown into volcanic ash. They donned their oxygen masks, and the first officer immediately called air traffic control.
we don't know. We have to go left now. It's smoky in the cockpit at the moment, sir.
KLM 867 Heavy, roger, left at your discretion.
The captain pushed the engines to maximum thrust and began a rapid climb, hoping to escape the ash cloud. But this only made things worse. At higher thrust, engine temperature rises rapidly, and that temperature is key. Jet engines operate at extremely high internal temperatures, over 1,400 degrees Celsius. Volcanic ash contains silicate materials which melt at around 1,100 degrees. When ash enters the engines, it melts into a sticky, molten glass. This glass coats turbine blades and internal components, blocking airflow. With airflow blocked, the engines can't sustain combustion. One by one, the engines begin to fail. Engine 2 dropped first, then Engine 3. A few seconds later, Engine 1 went silent. Finally, Engine 4 gave out. In under 60 seconds, the 747 was completely powerless.
So we climb level 390 in the black cloud, and the heading is 130. So 867, we have sold out all engines, and we are descending now.
KLM 867 Heavy, Anchorage.
KLM 867 Heavy, we are descending now. We are in the show.
The plane had lost all engine power. It was no longer a jet. It was now a glider. With no engines running, there was no power for the cockpit instruments. The displays briefly went dark as the aircraft switched to standby battery systems. Altitude was bleeding fast. The aircraft began descending at a rate of thousands of feet per minute. At this altitude, they had less than 15 minutes before they would hit terrain. Anchorage air traffic control began clearing nearby airspace and stood by to assist, watching a blip descend rapidly on radar with no guarantee of recovery. Inside the cabin, passengers would have noticed the change in noise, the hum of engines suddenly replaced by silence. The plane tilted forward. Some passengers felt themselves lifted slightly from their seats. A haze began to form inside the aircraft as trace amounts of ash and smoke filtered into the pressurized cabin. Light dimmed as the dense ash cloud blocked sunlight. The surreal quiet would have been terrifying. To make matters worse, a warning light indicated a fire in the forward cargo compartment. It was a false reading, triggered by ash interfering with sensors, but the pilots didn't know that. They now faced the terrifying possibility of a fire on top of a total engine failure. Captain van der Eist handed over control of the aircraft to the first officers and began attempting engine restarts. He tried once, then again, and again. Nothing. The engines wouldn't relight. The aircraft had now descended more than 10,000 feet. They were approaching terrain fast. With each failed restart, time was running out, but each attempt also allowed the engines to cool. As they cooled, the glass-like ash began to solidify and become brittle. The rushing air chipped it away slowly. Jet engines work by pulling air through multiple compressor stages, compressing it, then mixing it with fuel in the combustion chamber. That ignited mixture spins turbine blades that generate thrust. When ash coats or blocks those pathways, air can't flow and combustion stops. But if you let the engine cool, the brittle deposits may break off and restore airflow. Restarting a jet engine mid-air isn't just flipping a switch. It requires a delicate balance. Airflow, fuel, and ignition need to sync up precisely, all while flying through damage. Ash may have clogged sensors or damaged vital components. Each failed attempt also risked draining what little battery power remained. A Boeing 747 has a glide ratio of about 15:1. meaning for every 1,000 feet it descends, it can travel 15,000 feet forward. But over Alaska, surrounded by rugged, unforgiving mountain ranges, even that wasn't much reassurance. On the captain's 8th attempt, engines 1 and 2 on the left wing came back to life. 2 engines could keep the plane flying, barely, but with mountains all around, they needed more. Moments later, at roughly 11,000 feet, engines 3 and 4 restarted. All 4 engines were running, but the plane wasn't out of danger yet. The windshield had been sandblasted by ash. Visibility was almost zero. The pilots could barely see the runway and relied entirely on instruments and air traffic control guidance. Without that glass, even landing would be dangerous. The rest of the descent was controlled but tense. The flight was vectored manually by Anchorage controllers who guided them step by step to the runway. After several more minutes of careful descent, KLM Flight 867 landed safely in Anchorage. The aircraft was inspected. Over 80 kilograms of volcanic ash was found in the engines. All 4 engines were destroyed and had to be replaced. The windshield, wing edges, and leading surfaces had been abraded heavily. The cost of repairs would be more than $80 million, over $150 million today. Remarkably, no one was injured. In the aftermath of this incident, aviation authorities around the world took action. The International Civil Aviation Organization helped establish a global network of volcanic ash advisory centers, VAACs, to monitor ash clouds and alert aircraft. New guidelines were published. Pilots were advised to reduce thrust to idle during an ash encounter, as lower engine temperatures reduce the chance of ash melting and fusing onto engine components. They were also instructed to do a 180-degree turn as soon as possible to exit the ash cloud. And in a poetic twist, the same Boeing 747 continued to fly for KLM for nearly 3 decades. Its final flight was in 2018, captained by Walter Feardboom, one of the first officers from that fateful day in 1989. Today, pilots worldwide benefit from the lessons learned on KLM Flight 867, equipped with critical knowledge to respond effectively should they face this invisible and deadly threat again. But what happens when the warnings come too late? When the clock is already ticking? When smoke creeps into the cockpit?
We are declaring emergency now.
And every second becomes a decision that matters. That story is next. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more aviation stories.